Hello fight fans, thanks for joining us at MMA Insider. Before we get rolling with today's news, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing. Now let's uncover the latest happenings in MMA. Starting off, Joe Saunders thinks Tyson Fury had an off night versus Francis Nganu. Moving on, Tyson Fury versus Francis Nganu flopped in pay-per-view and streams as numbers. Next, a rematch between Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira is being planned to headline UFC 297. Lastly, Whittaker apologized to Islam Makhachev for his recent comments about him. Former boxing two-division champion Joe Saunders thinks Tyson Fury had an off night versus Francis Nganu. Fury scraped by a split decision against Ngannou in their crossover boxing match in Saudi Arabia. Fury was even knocked down in round 3 in a fight many thought he lost. Although Fury said he didn't underestimate Francis, Saunders insists Fury wasn't himself. He's confident a rematch would go completely differently. Talking to the media, this is what he stated. It wasn't a robbery. Tyson didn't prepare for this fight because he didn't consider Francis an opponent who could defeat him. Maybe Tyson didn't completely underestimate him, but he didn't prepare as hard for the fight as he usually does. If Tyson was a fraction of himself, Ngannou wouldn't lay a glove on him. Tyson Fury versus Francis Nganu didn't quite live up to the hype when it comes to pay-per-view buys. While the controversial split decision stole headlines worldwide, the build to Tyson Fury versus Francis Nganu wasn't enough to convince people to shell out the $79.99 for the bout. According to recent reports, the bout, which resulted in a split decision victory for Fury, would by far be one of the biggest busts when it comes to pay-per-view purchases for US residents. Fury vs. Ngannou sold approximately 56,000 buys on ESPN Plus and around 11,000 on traditional television in the US. If these numbers stand, the event will easily be the lowest number of buys either Fury or Ngannou have ever garnered when headlining a pay-per-view event. For comparison, here are the pay-per-view sales figures for past fights featuring Francis Nganu and Tyson Fury. Big news for UFC fans. A rematch between Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira is being planned to headline UFC 297. The event, not officially announced yet, is expected to happen on January 20th in Toronto. Originally, UFC 297 was supposed to feature Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. But now, it looks like that fight will move to the February pay-per-view instead. This news was reported by Ariel Helwani. This is what he wrote on Twitter. The current plan is to have Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira 2, headline UFC 297. That event, while not officially announced yet, is currently slated to January 20th in Toronto. The original plan for that main was Volkanovski versus Topuria, but now the plan is for that to be on the February pay-per-view. A women's bantamweight clash between Raquel Pennington and Mayra Bueno Silva is in the works for UFC 297 on January 20th in Toronto to determine the next official bantamweight champion. The two fighters are getting a chance to fight for the vacant title after former UFC women's bantamweight champion and pound-for-pound great Amanda Nunes retired from fighting at UFC 289 this past June. Amanda was hands down the best women's champion in the history of combat sports and left some pretty big shoes to fill. It will be up to Pennington and Silva to rise to the occasion and deliver a memorable performance to claim the belt. Whittaker is apologizing for his reaction to Islam Makhachev knocking out Alexander Volkanovski. The result was a KO victory for Islam. Fans and fellow fighters alike gave Islam credit for not only defeating Volkanovski at UFC 294, but also for defeating him back in February of this year at UFC 284. Prior to UFC 294, Whittaker believed that Alexander Volkanovski had won the first fight with Islam and predicted he would defeat Islam on the 21st of October, even though Volkanovski was stepping up on short notice. It was on a recent episode of his podcast that Whittaker apologized to not just the fans of the show, but also directly to Islam for unintentionally not giving him the credit he was due after such an impressive victory. This is what he said: "I just want to address it. I'm sorry if I underplayed Islam's achievements in beating Volk the way he did. That was not what I intended to do, even if that's how I made it sound. I'm sorry for that, but not really to you guys, to him, because I don't want him seeing it and feeling like that. I do not take anything away from the way Islam did to take on the newcomer, to take on a guy that gave him such a hard time in his first fight, to have such performance, to adapt to the changing opponents, to do what he did that night. Unbelievable." Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Your dedication and support fuel our passion to bring you the latest and greatest in the MMA world. If you enjoyed today's news, please give us a thumbs up and share with fellow MMA fans. Remember to subscribe to stay in the loop with daily MMA updates. We've got a lot of exciting news, interviews, and analysis coming your way every single day. Your engagement helps us grow and serve the MMA community even better. Once again, thank you for being an integral part of our daily MMA journey.